Hello, my name's Rebecca Farias. I'm a history major at Roger Williams University, and today I'm going to be conducting an interview with National Park Ranger John McNiff about Roger Williams and his relationship to the Native Americans. John, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, as you said, my name's John McNiff. I'm a ranger here at the Roger Williams National Memorial in Providence, Rhode Island. I've been here for many years telling the Roger Williams story and letting people know about it, but before that I was an archaeologist around here, and so I've actually dug up some of the things that I get to talk about. The stories that we talk about aren't just names and dates out of a book, but they're stories about real people. I've dug in their garbage.
So what was the norm in Native American-European interactions before Roger Williams founded Rhode Island?
Europeans and Native Americans had a long history of contact with each other, if you would. The first documented Europeans coming over here to New England is Giovanni de Verrazzano in 1524. He thought this place was wonderful. He spent 2 weeks in Narragansett Bay exploring the countryside, talking about how wonderful the people were that lived here, which would be the Narragansett and the Wampanoag people. He thought they were kind, they were generous, they were big, they were really tall, and he thought that this was one of the best places on his entire voyage. In the years that followed 1524, you have a number of different people coming over to New England for various purposes. Some are coming over here to fish because of Cape Cod and all the fish that were around here. You also have other people coming over here to trade with some of the Native Americans because things like beaver pelts were extremely important back in Europe. And they would come, and in some places you could tell that other Europeans had been there beforehand because, for example, along the coast of northern Massachusetts and up into Maine, the native peoples wouldn't let the English come on shore. They'd say, we'll meet you out on the water in our boats, and you bring your boat over, and then we'll trade boat to boat. Because they were a little bit, I'm not sure about the right word, but at least they wanted to keep that distance. Okay. Other places coming down to Cape Cod and southeastern Massachusetts, for many years the English would come on shore and they'd be trading and everything else, but after a while, there were also European and English people coming over here to capture people as slaves and then bring them back to Europe and sell them, or capture them as curiosities even. Because that phrase, the New World, okay, these were creatures from a new world. That's the way the Europeans saw it. And they would be bringing not just Native Americans, but they'd be bringing animals back over to Europe to put them on display as a curiosity. So you have this mixture of different things going on. The end result is, by the time the Pilgrims came over here in 1620, most of the Native Americans around here were very leery of any interaction with the Europeans.
So how do you think the Puritan colonists felt that they had to behave towards the Native Americans?
Well, in 1620, when the Pilgrims got here, and in 1630, when they settled Boston and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, there had been a series of diseases that had swept through southeastern Massachusetts and killed 60 to 90% of the native population. So they're coming onto a land that, from the English point of view, had been cleared by God for them. Okay, there's nobody living there. And it's not that there wasn't anybody living there. Up until about 1616, the place was heavily populated by the native people. But these diseases had a devastating effect on the population and on the culture. So when the first Europeans settled there, they felt that the land had been cleared and they didn't have to deal with the Native Americans. And if they did, they would deal with them as savages, as non-Christian people that they could do with what they wanted. That's more a result of a power relationship than anything else. The Europeans, particularly the English, felt that they had the right to do this.
Did Roger Williams defy that rule?
Roger Williams was a different kind of character. He was a very religious man, and when he came here, he didn't see savages as much as he saw human beings. And he saw an opportunity, and he saw the variety of different people that were here. He talks about how some of the native peoples are very quick to laugh, others are very quick to anger. And he treated them like human beings. That's one of the main things about Roger. He saw the fact that they were human beings here. At one point in the late 1500s in Europe, there were debates on whether these Native Americans were human at all, because they weren't mentioned in the Bible. And the Bible couldn't be wrong, so they couldn't be human beings. When the Europeans actually got over here and were settled on the coast and saw them, they knew that they were human, and then they tried to reconcile, how can this happen, that you have people that aren't talked about in the Holy Book? Roger even tried at some point to say, maybe, well, some of their words sound like Hebrew, so maybe they're one of the lost tribes of Israel. When he first comes here, he's trying to even reconcile this, that there's got to be some way to make that connection. In the end, he basically found out that they're just people, just like everybody else.
So do you think this put him at odds with the Massachusetts Bay Puritans and Europeans in general?
I think in some ways it did, but in other ways he became very useful to them. As the Native Americans, the Narragansett in particular, Roger was that middleman that both sides could trust. At one point the native peoples talk about how English written words don't always say the same thing twice. They would be convinced to sign a document, a treaty or a bill of sale or something like that, and when the terms were called up, they were different than what they had agreed to sign. And Roger was one of the few people that both sides trusted in that translation, in that communication between the two different cultures. And so in that sense, he was a middleman between two worlds.
So the original deed of sale for Providence from the Narragansett chiefs Canonicus and Miantonomi reflects that the land was sold unto Roger Williams. What was revolutionary about this exchange given the context of the day?
One of the things that got Roger into a lot of trouble was the fact that he said that this land belongs to the native people. Okay? And you can't just take it because you don't think anyone's living here or because the king says so. That you have to make some sort of a deal with the people that own this land, that have used this land for untold generations. And when he came here to this place that he ended up calling Providence, he had made a deal with the people that were in charge of this land to be their neighbor, to be part of this landscape, to be part of this place around Narragansett Bay. He didn't just come in, plant the flag, and say, now this is England. As a matter of fact, he came here and said, now I'm your neighbor. Okay? He made that deal with Canonicus and Miantonomi with their permission. It didn't happen elsewhere.
So, shifting topics now.
Sure.
Williams, as we know, he was a staunch defender of freedom of conscience, which was the ability to worship or not worship whomever one chooses. For example, in a 1670 letter to Connecticut Governor John Pence, he wrote that forced worship stinks in God's nostrils. Similar sentiments are echoed in the impassioned essay, Christenings Make Not Christians, in which Williams advises strongly against the conversion of natives. Why do you think he took this stance if he believed so strongly in his faith?
Another thing that Roger had said was the civil sword can make a nation full of hypocrites, but not one true Christian. Roger wanted people to believe in the faith that they were part of. It's one of the reasons he founded the Baptist Church here in Providence. He didn't want infants baptized and then, okay, you've got the label of being a Christian. That's hence the title of the book. Christenings Make Not Christians. Just because you're baptized, it doesn't make you a Christian. A Christian is the way that you live. It's expressing and believing and acting in your faith, not just the fact that you were baptized. How many times have we seen in movies people that are supposedly Christian, whether they're mobsters even, they're in church at one moment and the next moment they're ordering a hit on someone. This is the kind of thing that Roger wanted to avoid. That idea that the civil sword, that the government, can force people to go through the motions of being a member of the church, but it can't make one true Christian. That's why Roger didn't want forced conversion among the native peoples either. Plus, the Narragansett had a wonderful answer to him. When he went to preach to the Narragansett said to him, go make the English good Christians first. And he couldn't argue with that.
So do you think his beliefs stemmed from his experiences in England?
I think as an Englishman, I think his beliefs stem from the fact that he was an Englishman. You've got to remember, just before Roger was born, the years before that formed his immediate history, King Henry VIII had been a member of the Roman Catholic Church, had been given an award by the Pope as Defender of the Faith. But when he wanted a divorce, he broke from the Roman Catholic Church and established the Church of England, seized Roman Catholic Church properties, the monasteries, and gave that out to his friends. Well, when Henry died, his son Edward became king, and didn't like the Church of England or the Roman Catholic Church. He liked the Presbyterian Church from Scotland. So everyone now in England has to become Presbyterian. Edward's only on the throne for a few years. When he dies, Henry's daughter Mary becomes queen. She's Roman Catholic. So all that church property is brought back. Now it belongs to the church. Everybody that had been Roman Catholic, Church of England, Presbyterian, now is back to the Roman Catholic Church. But Mary dies after a short time. And then Henry's other daughter, Elizabeth, becomes queen. And she's in favor of the Church of England. So now, everybody that had been Roman Catholic, Church of England, Presbyterian, Roman Catholic, is back to the Church of England. If you wanted to be a good Englishman, you had to keep changing churches. Roger sees that as his immediate history. And he says, what does that say about faith? You know, if you want to be a good Englishman, you have to keep changing churches. Well, the different churches are there because they have a different set of faith and beliefs. If you're willing to compromise them to be a good Englishman, then your faith means nothing. Roger saw it as when you combined government and religion together in any way, shape, or form, it's not about faith anymore, it's about power and control. And that's what he didn't want to happen. For him, separating church and state was because religion was too important to be tied to something like government.
So, on a more anthropological note,
yeah.
Roger's revolutionary book, written in 1643, A Key into the Language of America, is more than a linguistic key into the Algonquin language. It's a collection of anthropological observations ordered towards legitimizing the Native American peoples, most notably in the eyes of the English. William states, "Boast not, proud English, of thy birth and blood. Thy brother Indian is by birth as good. Of one blood God made him, and thee and all, as wise, as fair, as strong, as personal." What are the ramifications of such a radical statement?
He is throwing the natural way that the Native Americans are acting, believing, everything else right in the face of the English to show how hypocritical the English are. That statement by the Narragansett, "Go make the English good Christians first," is literally what he's saying there. Quite often the English are criticizing the Native Americans because they're not the right bloodline, they're not the right place, they're not good enough, or they're not behaving correctly enough, or they're not Christian enough. Roger takes in the key and shows how the Native Americans, their natural behavior, the way their laws are set up, the way that they treat foreigners, the way they treat strangers, are actually more Christian-like than the supposedly Christian English. And it's a critique. He's using that book to critique the English that have come over here. Ostensibly, to escape religious persecution, they've come over here and set up a brand new level of religious persecution. The Massachusetts Bay beacon on the hill, that light to show England how to fix itself, is full of as many holes as old England was itself.
How do you think the English felt about this?
Well, nobody likes to have a mirror shown to themselves and show their blemishes and show what's wrong with them. Of course they were upset at it. But that book was a bestseller in England.
So, on the other hand, it's recorded that Roger Williams signed several Native Americans into slavery at the end of King Philip's War in 1676. Do you think the brutal conflict was the reason for this exchange? And do you think it changed his mentality towards the Native Americans? Is there any way you can defend his choice?
A lot of ways that can be defended. You first of all have to take away 21st century mentality about conflict, about slavery, and everything else. Where Roger is a person of the 17th century. He lived in the 1600s. Okay? After a war, after you've defeated somebody and you're living on that land, what do you do with all the adult males? Do you let them stay there and have an insurgency rise up and the war start up again? Typical behavior for most English countries were to take the adult males, and sell them into slavery at some faraway place that gets rid of any more troublemakers that might be there. The war's not going to start up in another year again, and it gets rid of them. That was typical behavior. The English did it to the Irish in the 1640s. They depopulated huge sections of Ireland and sent the Irish down to the Caribbean as slaves. This was not that unusual. The war was absolutely horrible, and Roger was heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken about the way that it had fallen out. But there's a little hint that he was not totally disillusioned about the Native Americans around here, and that's a letter about the burning of Providence.
So, in conclusion, do you have any messages that we could take in the 21st century from Roger Williams's interactions with the Native Americans, and Roger Williams as a role model?
Sure. The thing to remember is when Roger Williams left England and came here, he was the stranger here. This was Native American land. Other English came here with firearms, they came with swords, they came with weapons, and they took land. Roger Williams saw other human beings, in his mind, other creations of God, that he had to treat as precious, as equals. And he went there not with a sword in his hand, not with a gun in his hand, but with an open hand, to be friends and neighbors with them. Now, some Native Americans feel that any of these English are just invaders, and there's a legitimate reason to think that. Roger Williams didn't want to be invading, he wanted to be a neighbor. He could no longer live where he was. And the thing to remember is there's many people in the world today that are driven from their own homes because they can no longer live there. And we have to look to what Roger Williams did and to what the Native Americans did to see what we should do today.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.